There is a particular kind of cold that lives only in stone buildings on winter mornings, and I have carried it in my bones ever since. It is not the cold of the air outside. It is the cold that rises up out of the floor of a great cathedral through the soles of your boots, through the leather and the wool and the discipline, until it settles in the marrow and stays there like a memory. I felt it that morning as I stood in the west transept of the great cathedral at Harrogate with 7 other men of the Royal Guard, waiting to lift a coffin that carried a better man than any of us onto our shoulders and carry him the length of the nave to the king. My name is Halvard Reeve. On the day this happened, I held the rank of sergeant in the Royal Guard of the Kingdom of Eldermore, and I had stood 100 posts and marched in 100 ceremonies, and never once put a boot wrong that any living soul had seen. Discipline was not a thing I practiced. It was a thing I was made of. I tell you that not out of pride, but so you understand what it cost me later, when everything I was made of nearly came apart in front of a nation. The man in the coffin was Corporal Emrys Vale, of the King's Own Marches Regiment, and he was 26 years old. I had never met him. That is the strange truth of the ceremonial life. You carry men you never knew, you stand vigil over strangers, you bow your head for names you learned that same week. But by the morning of the funeral, I felt I knew Emrys Vale the way you know a man from the shape of the hole he leaves behind. In the 3 days of lying in state, I had watched the whole of his short life file past his coffin in the persons of the people who had loved him. His mother, Nurys, a small straight-backed woman who came every single day and stood longer than the ushers wished and never once wept where anyone could see. His young widow, Elowen, who came in the mornings before the crowds and put her gloved hand flat on the polished lid as though she could still feel a heartbeat under it. His little daughter, Aveline, who was 5 years old and did not understand any of it, and who I watched twice try to climb the low rail so she could see her father, and be lifted gently down each time by her grandmother. And I had read, as every man in the guard had read, the citation. It was not a long document. The best ones never are. Corporal Vale had been part of a small detachment holding a river crossing at the fords of Kellen, when a border raid came through in the gray before dawn. It was not a battle that would be in any history. It was the kind of thing that happens on the edges of a kingdom and is over before the capital has finished its breakfast. A raiding party had come across the water meaning to burn a market town on the far bank, and there had been 9 soldiers of the marches standing between them and it, and Corporal Vale had been the one who saw that the old timber bridge could be dropped into the river and cut the raiders off if a man stood at the near end long enough to hold them while the charge was set. He had volunteered to be that man. He had held the near end. The bridge had gone into the river, and the town had not burned, and 8 of the 9 soldiers had come home. Emrys Vale had come home too. But he had come home in a coffin, under the colors of the realm, on the shoulders of the King's Own Guard, and the King himself had commanded that he be given a state funeral in the Great Cathedral at Harrogate, an honor reserved, in the ordinary run of things, for princes and admirals and men who had governed provinces, a corporal from a border regiment. The court had murmured about it. I had heard the murmuring. Some of the older stewards thought it excessive, thought it broke the proper order of things, thought that a soldier of the line, however brave, ought to be buried among his own with the honors his rank allowed and not laid before the throne like a duke. King Alaric had listened to all of it, I was told, and had said only one thing in reply. The order of things, he had said, is that the kingdom honors most the men who ask least of it. Corporal Vale asked for nothing. He shall have everything. I had stood the vigil over him, too, and I think that is where the whole of it truly began for me, on the nights before the funeral, in the dark of the cathedral after the crowds had gone. For the 3 days a body of the honored dead lies in state, it is never left alone. 4 men of the guard stand over the coffin at all hours, 1 at each corner, relieved every 2 hours through the day and the long night, motionless, heads bowed, rifles reversed. It is the coldest and the stillest duty we have, and the one the young men dread and the old men come in time to understand. I stood it 3 times over those 3 nights, the small hours, the dead middle of the dark when the great cathedral empties down to the guttering of the candles, and the vast breathing hush of a stone room too big for the few souls left in it. And there is nothing to do but stand at your corner with your head bowed over a stranger's coffin and think. You would suppose a man would think of nothing, or of his cold feet, or of his bed. What you actually think of, standing so, is the man under the lid. You cannot help it. 2 hours is a long time to stand over a person, even a person you never met, and the mind goes to him. I found myself, on the second night, wondering what Emrys Vale had been thinking in the gray hour at the near end of the bridge. Whether he had been afraid, of course he had been afraid. Only a fool is not afraid, and the citation did not read like a fool. And whether, in the deciding, he had thought of the small daughter who came each day to try to climb the rail. I decided that he had. I decided a man who volunteers to hold the near end of a bridge is precisely the sort of man who is thinking of a 5-year-old girl when he does it, that the girl is the reason and not a thing forgotten in the heat of it, and that thought settled over me at my cold corner and would not lift. It was on the 3rd night that the widow came. She was not supposed to be there. The cathedral was closed, the doors barred, only the guard and the night clergy within. But a Lowen Vale had come to the small side door, and the young guardsman posted there had not had it in him to turn away a soldier's widow at midnight. And so she came up the dark nave alone in her plain coat and stood a little way off from the coffin, not approaching, not wishing, I think, to disturb our vigil, only wanting to be near him in the one place and the 1 hour she could have him to herself without a kingdom watching. I was at the near corner. I did not move. You do not move on vigil whatever comes, but I watched her from under my bowed brow, and after a long while she spoke, very low, not to me, not to any of us, only to the box. I will not tell you what she said. It was not meant for me, and I have kept it these many years, and I will keep it to the grave. But I will tell you that standing there unmoving in the dark, forbidden to so much as turn my head to a grieving woman, holding my discipline over her like a roof while she said her private words to her dead husband, that was the hardest post I ever stood, and the one I would least give back. When she had finished, she stood a moment more, and then she said, aloud to us, to the 4 still men at the corners whom she had perhaps only then remembered were living, "Thank you for staying with him." And she went back down the dark nave and out the side door into the night, and we stood on till the dawn relief came. So when I say I never met Corporal Emrys Vale, understand what I mean and what I do not mean. I never shook his hand, but I stood 3 nights over him in the dark, and I heard his widow say good night to him, and by the morning of the funeral there was no man in that bearer line who would not have gone down under a falling weight for him sooner than let him touch the ground. That is not something they drill into you. That grows in you in the cold, on the vigil, in the small hours, and it was already grown in all 8 of us by the time we bent to lift. And so here we were. Here was I, Sergeant Halvard Reeve, standing in the cold transept in my finest tunic with my white gloves gripped in my fist, waiting for the moment when Captain Osric Dane would give the signal and 8 of us would bend as one and take Corporal Emrys Vale up onto our shoulders for his last journey down the aisle of the greatest cathedral in the land. I want to describe that cathedral to you as it was that morning, because the size of it matters to what happened. The nave ran the better part of 200 paces from the great west doors to the steps of the high sanctuary, and it was flanked on both sides by pillars as thick as old oaks that rose up into a vaulting so high that the top of it was lost in a kind of gray haze of incense and winter light. Every pace of that long floor was lined with people. The pews held the great and the good of the kingdom, the lords and the ladies, the ministers, the officers of every regiment in their dress uniforms, the ambassadors of friendly realms in their sashes and stars. And beyond the pews, standing in the side aisles because there were not enough seats in the world for all who had wanted to come, stood the ordinary people. Men and women who had queued in the dark and the cold since the middle of the night for the chance to stand in the same building as the coffin of a corporal they had never met, because something in his story had reached out of the news sheets and taken hold of them. At the far end, on a raised dais before the high altar, sat the royal household. King Alaric in the center in the deep blue and gray of the House of Harrogate, a big man made bigger by stillness, his graying beard close-trimmed, his hands folded on the head of a ceremonial cane he did not truly need. To his right, Crown Prince Rowan, younger and leaner and sharper, his eyes moving over the crowd the way a soldier's eyes move, counting exits, reading the room. To the king's left, Princess Adela, the king's sister, a woman of perhaps 50 with a face that had learned somewhere the difficult art of being kind and unbending at the same time. Behind and around them, the officers of the court, the chamberlains and the stewards in their robes of office. And down at our end of the nave, low and quiet and utterly without any of that grandeur, in the front pew on the left where the family sat, were the three people who had actually lost something. Emrys Vale, straight-backed. Eloan Vale, very pale with her hands folded in her lap. And between them, small and swinging her feet because they did not reach the floor, little Aveline in a dark blue coat that someone had bought her for the occasion, and that she would grow out of by spring. I saw all of this in the last long minute before we lifted him, the way you see everything with terrible clarity in the moment before a thing you cannot undo. There is a piece of equipment that no one in a cathedral ever thinks about until it fails, and it is the coffin strap. When 8 men carry a coffin on their shoulders, the weight is not truly held by the shoulders. It is held by 2 broad webbing straps that run underneath the coffin and up over the shoulders of the bearers, 4 men to a side, so that the great polished box seems to float at shoulder height, while in truth it hangs in a cradle of woven cloth. The straps are the whole of it. A bearer's shoulder is only the peg the strap hangs from. And the straps are checked, and checked again, and checked a 3rd time by the master of the bearers before any ceremony, because a strap is the one thing between dignity and catastrophe. I did not know it that morning, standing in the cold, but one of our straps was wrong. I have gone over it 10,000 times in the years since. The strap that failed was the forward strap on the left side, my strap, the one that ran over my own shoulder and the shoulder of the man behind me. It had been swapped out the evening before. The regular strap, the one that had carried a dozen coffins and been tested to twice the weight it would ever hold, had been found to have a small fray near the buckle during the final inspection, and rather than risk it, the master of the bearers had drawn a replacement from the cathedral stores, a strap that had hung on a hook in a cold, damp vestry for no one knew how many years, waiting for exactly this kind of emergency, and that had never in all that time been put under a load. No one had done anything wrong, you understand. That is the thing that took me longest to make peace with. The master had followed the rule, a frayed strap is a bad strap, replace it. The replacement had passed its inspection, because a strap that has hung in a cold vestry looks perfectly sound to the eye and to the hand. There was no negligence. There was no fool. There was only a length of old webbing, its fibers grown brittle with age and damp in a way that no inspection could see, waiting under my white glove for the moment it would be asked to do the one thing it could no longer do. Captain Osric Dane, standing at the head of the coffin, met my eyes across the polished lid. His face gave nothing away. His face never gave anything away, which is why he was captain, but I understood him. It was time. "Bearers," he said, very low in the voice that carries in a stone room without ever being raised, "take the strain." We bent. 8 men, one movement drilled into us until it lived below thought. I felt the webbing come taut across my shoulder, and I felt the weight of Corporal Emrys Vale come onto me. And I want to tell you that even then, even with a stranger's brittle strap over my shoulder, there was a kind of holiness in it. To take a man's whole weight onto your body. To be, for the length of one aisle, the thing that carries him. I straightened my knees, and the coffin rose smooth and level to shoulder height, and hung there in its cradle of straps, floating, dignified, perfect. "Forward," said Captain Dane. And we stepped off, left foot first, into the long, cold nave, and the organ above us began the slow processional, and 2,000 people rose to their feet in a great soft rushing sound like a wave drawing back off shingle, and we began to carry Corporal Emrys Vale toward the king. I counted the paces. A bearer always counts the paces. It is how you keep the step slow and even, how you keep 8 men moving as one animal down a long floor. 1, 2, 3. The great west doors fell behind us. 4, 5, 6. We passed the first of the great pillars, and the faces of the crowd swam at the edges of my vision, pale ovals in the candlelight, and I kept my eyes forward and level the way I had been trained, and I carried him. We were perhaps 40 paces down the nave, just coming level with the place where the ordinary people stood thickest in the side aisle, when I felt the strap change. It is a thing I have no good words for, though I have tried to find them for years. A sound strap under load is a solid thing, a live thing, humming very faintly with the weight it holds. What I felt over my shoulder in that instant was that solidity going soft. A give. A tiny sag, no more than you would feel if a man leaned on you for a moment and then thought better of it. To anyone watching it would have been nothing. To me, carrying, it was the floor opening under my life. I knew. In the half-second before it happened, I knew exactly what was coming, and I could no more stop it than a man can stop a falling cup once it has left his hand. The strap did not snap all at once. If it had snapped clean, the coffin would have dropped straight and hard, and it would have been a different and simpler horror. Instead, the old webbing tore slowly, fiber by brittle fiber, across perhaps a full second, and in that second the forward left corner of the coffin sank, not fell, sank, tilting down and away from me as my end lost its cradle, and I felt the whole great weight of it begin to sluice sideways off the shoulders of the 4 of us on the left, and I heard, from 2,000 throats at once, the sound a nation makes when it sees something sacred begin to fall. I did the only thing a bearer can do. I dropped. Not away from the weight, into it. Every man of the guard is taught, drilled, made to know in his body that if a coffin goes, you go under it. You never let go, you never step back. You get whatever part of yourself you can beneath the falling thing and you hold. I went down onto one knee on the cold stone with the ruin of the strap trailing from my shoulder, and I got both my gloved hands up under the sinking corner, and I took the weight of it directly onto my arms, and beside me and behind me, I felt the other 3 men on my side do the same, all of us dropping and catching, so that the coffin did not crash. It did not fall the length of a man onto the cathedral floor, with a sound that would have echoed in that stone room for 100 years. It sank perhaps the length of a forearm and stopped, caught in 8 sets of hands, tilted hard down at the forward left corner but held. Held but not level, and that was the disaster inside the disaster. Because when the corner sank and the box tilted, the lid moved. A state coffin is not nailed. It would be a coarse thing, a carpenter's thing, to nail shut the coffin of a man being honored before the king. The lid of such a coffin is fitted and secured with a set of polished catches along its length, and those catches are strong, and those catches are sound, and not one of them failed that morning. But no catch made by human hands is designed for the particular wrenching, twisting force of a heavy coffin slewing sideways off 4 men's shoulders and being caught hard at one corner. The frame flexed. It was only for an instant, and it was only a little, but a little was enough. Along the forward third of the coffin, on the left side, the lid jumped its catches and lifted a hand's breadth. A slice of shadow opening between the lid and the box where no shadow should ever be, and the great folded flag of the realm that was draped across the whole of it, the deep blue and silver colors of eldermore that had lain so perfectly smooth over the polished wood, slid. I saw it slide. I was down on my knee with my arms full of the weight of a dead soldier, and I could do nothing but watch the colors of the kingdom begin to slip off the tilted lid toward the floor, and I understood, in a cold, clear rush that had no fear in it yet because there was no room for fear, exactly what 2,000 people were about to see. The lid was open. The flag was going. In one more instant the covering would be gone, and the coffin would be open and tilted toward the whole of that watching crowd. And the last dignity of Corporal Emrys Vale, the one thing his mother and his widow and his small daughter had been promised, that he would be carried before the king whole and covered and honored, that they would remember this day as the day the kingdom kept faith with him, was about to be torn away in front of them by a length of rotten webbing and the cruelty of chance. I have stood in the line when men wished me harm. I have been shouted at by the powerful and grabbed at by the drunk, and I have never in my life felt the thing I felt in that instant on my knee on the cathedral floor. It was not fear for myself. It was a horror so complete and so specific that it had a shape. The shape was Aloan Vale's face, 40 paces away, about to see. And then, before I had finished the thought, before the flag had slid the last hand's breadth, before the crowd's indrawn breath had even become a cry, the king moved. I did not see him rise. I have spoken since to 100 people who were there, and not one of them saw the actual moment King Alaric came up out of his chair on the dais at the far end of the sanctuary, because it was too fast to see. One instant he was seated in his stillness with his hands folded on the head of his cane, and the next instant the cane was clattering on the stone where he had let it fall, and he was already down off the dais and moving. A big man, a man of 60 years. Moving down that long sanctuary and into the nave at a speed that no one who knew only the still, weighty king of the state occasions would have believed was in him. But he was not only the king of state occasions. That is a thing the court forgets, and the older soldiers never do. Alaric of Harrogate had been a soldier himself before the crown came to him unlooked for through the deaths of an elder brother and a nephew. He had carried coffins in his own young years, had stood in the bearer line, had felt a strap under his own shoulder. His body remembered what his court had forgotten. And when the box began to fall, his body did not wait for his dignity to give it leave. He reached me, in the time it took the flag to slide that last hand's breadth. And he did not do the thing a king is supposed to do. He did not call for stewards. He did not command someone else to act. He went down onto both knees on the cold stone floor of his own cathedral in his robes of state before 2,000 of his people, and he caught the coffin of Corporal Emrys Vale in his own 2 hands. He got one broad hand under the sunk forward corner beside mine, taking a share of the weight I was holding, steadying it. And with his other hand, and this is the thing, this is the whole of it, this is what I will tell them about on the last day of my life, with his other hand he did not reach for the coffin at all. He reached for the flag. In the half-instant before the sliding colors could fall away and leave the lid bare and open to the crowd, the King of Eldermore caught the edge of the flag of his own realm in his fist and swept it up in a cross, up over the opened lid, drawing the whole broad blue and silver span of it back over the coffin like a man throwing a blanket over something precious in the rain. And he held it there, spread wide under his hand, covering the gap, covering the lid, covering everything. So that in the very moment the crowd's breath broke, and every eye in that cathedral fixed on the fallen coffin, what they saw was not an open coffin at all. What they saw was their king, down on both knees on the stone, one hand under the corner and one hand spread wide over the colors, holding the whole of it together with his own body, so that not one soul in that vast room saw anything of Corporal Emrys Vale, but the flag of the realm and the king's hand upon it. Nothing was seen. I need you to understand that because it is the truth, and because it is the mercy at the center of this whole story. Whatever chance and a rotten strap had meant to expose, the king's body and the king's hand and the flag of the kingdom hid it from every eye in that cathedral in the space of a single breath. Corporal Emrys Vale's last dignity was not torn away in front of his widow. It was caught, an inch from the floor, in the hands of his king. For a moment, one long, ringing, impossible moment, nobody in that whole cathedral moved. 2,000 people on their feet, the organ faltering into silence above us as the organist forgot his own hands, the incense drifting in the high gray light, and at the center of it, all the King of Eldermore down on both knees on the cold stone, with his arms spread over a corporal's coffin, holding. And then into that silence, without lifting his head, in a voice that was not loud but that carried to the last standing man at the back of the nave, the way only certain voices can, King Alaric spoke. "Steady," he said to me, to the 8 of us, as if we were his own bearer line and he the master of us all. "Steady, my guard, he is not going to fall. Not while I am here. I have been given orders all my life. I have been given orders under fire, orders in the cold, orders by men I would have followed into the sea. I have never in my life obeyed an order the way I obeyed that one, because it did not feel like an order that came from above me. It felt like an order from a man on the floor beside me, sharing my weight, his shoulder against my shoulder, his breath coming as hard as mine. Steady." I steadied. All down the left side of the coffin I felt the other 3 men lock, felt the tremor go out of their arms because the king had told them the thing they most needed to hear, which was not "you will not be punished," and was not "this is not your fault." It was "he is not going to fall. Put the whole of your strength there. Nothing else matters." For a moment we simply held, the 8 of us and the king, 9 men now under one coffin, 4 of us kneeling, and I heard the king's voice again, lower, meant only for us. "Captain Dane," he said, without turning his head, without lifting his hand from the flag, "I have the forward corner and the colors. On my word your sound bearers will take the strain and lift, slow and sergeant." And I understood with a small shock that he had read the sergeant's chevrons on the sleeve of the man kneeling beside him with his arms full of the weight. "Sergeant, when we rise, you and I bring this corner up together. Slow, slow as growing grass. We are not lifting a coffin. We are lifting a man. Do you have him?" "I have him, sire," I said. My voice did not shake. I have thanked God for that 1,000 times, that in the one moment of my life when it would have mattered most for my voice to shake, it did not. "I have him." "Then we will not hurry," said the king. And we did not hurry. I will tell you exactly how it went, because the how of it is the honor of it. Captain Dane did not shout. He gave the command in the same low carrying voice the king had used, and the 4 sound bearers on the right and the 2 sound men behind me took the strain slow, and the king and I brought the fallen corner up out of its sink, hand over hand, the 2 of us breathing together, and the great weight came level again by the width of a finger at a time. The lid, freed of the twisting force, settled back down of its own accord toward its catches as the frame came true, and the king's spread hand followed it down, smoothing the flag flat over the closing gap so that the colors lay perfect and unbroken across the whole of the coffin once more, exactly as they had lain when we stepped off from the west doors, as though nothing had happened at all. Except that everything had happened. 2,000 people had seen a coffin fall. 2,000 people had seen their king down on his knees on the stone. That could not be unseen. But not one of them had seen Corporal Emrys Vale, and that was the only unseeing that mattered. We rose. The king rose with us, refused. I saw the arm that Crown Prince Rowan had reached in to offer him, refused it not sharply but with a small shake of his head, because a man does not want to be helped up from the side of a soldier's coffin as though he were feeble. He came up under his own power slow, his robes of state gone gray at the knees with the dust of the cathedral floor, and he did not brush them off. He would wear that dust the rest of the day. I saw later that he wore it deliberately. I have not yet told you what was happening at the other end of the cathedral in those moments, because I could not see it, kneeling. I have it from those who could. When the coffin began to fall and the king came up out of his chair, the whole dais came up with him, every officer of the court half risen in alarm, and it was Princess Adela who held the room. She did not move to the coffin. There were hands enough at the coffin, and she was wise enough in an instant to see it. What she saw instead was the danger the rest of us were too close to feel, that in the pews below the dais sat the ambassadors and envoys of a dozen realms, men whose whole trade is the reading of another kingdom's weakness, and that every one of them was watching the house of Harrogate at the exact moment a sacred thing came apart in its hands. A kingdom that panics at its own altar tells the watching world a great deal. Princess Adela did not let it panic. She rose once calmly to her full height, and she did not cry out and she did not clutch at anyone, and she set her hand on the shoulder of the nearest half-risen steward and pressed him gently back down into his seat, and by that one unhurried gesture, a woman standing serene while her brother knelt on the floor, she told the whole watching room how to behave. Be still. This is not a disaster. This is my family doing what my family does. Watch and learn who we are. And the room, taking its cue from her as a room always takes its cue from the one person in it who is not afraid, went still and held and watched. Crown Prince Rowan did move, came down off the dais in 3 strides, but his father was already there, already down, already had it, and so Rowan did the harder thing, which was to stop. He stopped at the foot of the sanctuary steps, close enough to reach his king in a heartbeat if the weight went again, and he stood there, hand near enough to help and far enough not to crowd, reading the whole scene the way I had watched him read the crowd at the start, and finding, I think, that there was nothing for him to do but let his father be the king in the way his father had chosen to be it. There is a discipline in that too, harder than the discipline of action, to stand at the edge of a falling thing that your father has already caught and trust him and let him. Rowan learned something at the foot of those steps that morning. He told me so years later when he was king himself and I was an old man, and he had called me to the palace one winter to walk with him a while before the reading of the roll. I learned, he said, that the crown is not the thing that acts. The man is the thing that acts. The crown only decides what kind of man is wearing it when the strap breaks. That was the room, then, in the moments I knelt with my arms full of the weight. A princess holding 100 foreign eyes still with her stillness, a crown prince learning to trust, a court frozen between alarm and awe, 2,000 ordinary people with the breath still caught in their chests. And at the center of all of it, on his knees on the stone, the king and the flag and the 8 of us, and the man we would not drop. The coffin hung level again in the cradle of the sound straps and the king's steadying hand. And now there was the problem of the broken strap, the trailing ruin of old webbing that hung from my shoulder and could carry nothing, and the 40 paces still to go to the sanctuary steps. A steward came hurrying then, the Lord Steward of the household, an old man named Cadwyn Brooke, whose whole life was the correctness of ceremonies, and to whom, I think, what had just happened was very nearly a physical agony. I do not blame him for what he did. He was a man watching the most important ceremony of his year come apart, and he did the thing that men of his kind do, which is reach for the rule and reach for the blame in the same motion. "Sire," he said, low and urgent, arriving at the king's shoulder, his face gray. "Sire, forgive me, the bearers must be relieved at once. We will bring fresh men, and the man responsible for the strap will answer for this. I will have his name before the hour is." "You will have no name," said the king. He did not raise his voice. He had not raised his voice once through the whole of it, but there was something in the 4 words that stopped Cadwyn Brooke as though he had walked into a wall. "But sire, the strap someone." "The strap," said King Alaric, "was inspected and passed and hung in the stores of this cathedral for longer than that child in the front pew has been alive." He had seen Aveline too, then. He had seen all of it the way he seemed to have seen all of it. It failed because old things fail, Cadwyn, and not because any man of my guard was careless. Look at them. He did not gesture. He did not need to. Look at what they did when it failed. 4 of them went to their knees under a falling weight, rather than let it touch the floor. If you are searching this cathedral for a man who failed Corporal Vale this morning, you will not find him among these 8. You will find 8 men who caught him. Now. He turned his head at last and looked full at me, and I will tell you that being looked at by King Alaric of Harrogate from a distance of 1 foot is a thing that reorders a man. "Sergeant, your strap is gone. Can these 7 carry him the rest of the way if I take your place at the corner?" The question undid me more than the fall had. The King of Eldermore, offering to walk the last 40 paces of a state funeral as the 8th bearer of a corporal's coffin, in his dust-grayed robes, so that a broken man of his guard would not have to be shamefully relieved and marched away in front of the crowd. "Sire," I said, and I had to fight for the words, "the honor is his," said the king, meaning the man in the coffin, "and I will share the carrying of it. That is not a question I asked you, Sergeant. Take your place, I will take mine. Cadwyn, the family, go to the family, tell them nothing is wrong. Tell them their son is well honored and that the king has him. Go." And Cadwyn Brooke, the Lord Steward of the household, who a moment before had been hunting for a man to break, went instead down the nave to the front pew to kneel by a corporal's mother and tell her that her son was well honored. I saw him go. I saw, later, that it was the beginning of something in him too, though I did not know it then. So it was that we carried Corporal Emrys Vale the last 40 paces to the king's own sanctuary, with the King of Eldermore at the forward left corner in the place where my broken strap had been, his own broad shoulder taking the weight that the webbing could no longer take, his dust-gray robes and his bare head, walking the slow bearer's pace with 7 men of his guard and 1 dead soldier of the marches. I walked at his side, freed of the coffin, in the place a bearer takes when he has been relieved but will not leave the line, 1 pace to the left and level, my hand hovering near the corner ready. I did not need to catch anything. The king carried his share the whole way and never faltered. And the crowd, 2,000 people who a minute before had cried out in horror, the crowd did a thing I have never heard a crowd do before or since. They did not cheer, for you do not cheer at a funeral. They did not weep aloud, though many were weeping. As we came level with them, pace by slow pace, the standing people in the side aisles began, one by one and then in a great soft spreading wave, to bow. Not the shallow bob of courtesy. The deep, full bow from the waist, the bow a man gives to something greater than himself, and they gave it not to the king, though the king was there, and not only to the coffin, though the coffin was there. They gave it, I understood, to the whole of it, to the thing they had just seen. To a kingdom that, when the sacred began to fall, put its king on his knees on the stone to catch it. We reached the sanctuary steps. We set Corporal Emrys Vale down upon the catafalque that waited there, slow, level, the king's hand and mine easing the forward corner down together onto the draped bier, and the flag lay perfect across him, blue and silver and unbroken, and the thing was done, and he was safe. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the king would return to his dais, and the funeral would go on, and that we had, by the grace of God and the reflexes of an old soldier, turned a catastrophe into a near thing that the kingdom would whisper about for a season, and then forget. I did not yet understand King Alaric. I did not understand that for him, catching the coffin had not been the great act. Catching the coffin had only been the reflex. The great act was still to come, and it began when he did not go back to his chair. I had returned to my post by then. That is the thing the crowd never sees and the guard never forgets, that even in the middle of catastrophe, the moment the weight is safe, a guardsman goes back to his place and becomes a statue again, and stands, and feels everything from behind a face that shows nothing. I stood at the side of the sanctuary with my ruined strap coiled now in my fist where no one could see it, and my heart going like a drum against the stillness I held over it. And I watched my king stand at the head of a corporal's coffin with the dust of the floor on his knees, and I will tell you what I felt, because it is the truest thing I know about that morning. I felt forgiven for a thing I had not done. That is the only way I can say it. All my life in the guard I had carried a fear so deep I had never once looked straight at it. The fear that discipline is a bargain, that we are kept and honored only so long as we are perfect, and that the day one of us falters, however innocently, the kingdom that loved the statue would turn its face from the man. I had watched Cadwyn Brooke reach for a name to break, and I had thought, there it is, the truth of it, the moment the strap breaks they come for the man. And then the king had said you will have no name, and had knelt on the stone, and had asked me to keep my corner, and something in me that had been clenched for 20 years came quietly loose and has never clenched again. A kingdom that only loves you while you are perfect does not love you at all. I learned at my post, with my heart hammering behind my stillness, that I served a different kind of kingdom than the one my fear had always told me I served. So did every man in that guard. You could see it in how they stood, after straighter, and somehow easier at the same time, the way a man stands who has just discovered that the ground beneath him will hold. The order of a state funeral is a fixed and ancient thing. The bearers set the coffin down and withdraw. The clergy come forward. The king returns to his place, and the rite proceeds: the readings, the anthem, the eulogy given by a great officer of state, the commendation, the long, slow business of a kingdom folding one of its dead away. Every man in that cathedral knew the order. Cadwin Brooke, coming back up the nave from the family pew, plainly expected the king to resume it. I saw him glance toward the empty royal chair, and then toward the king, and I saw the flicker of a new alarm cross his face when he understood that Alaric was not moving toward it. The king stood at the head of the catafalque with his dust-gray knees and his bare head, one hand resting flat and light upon the flag over the coffin, and he did not step back to make room for the clergy. He stood where a bearer stands. And after a moment, into the enormous waiting silence of that place, he began to speak, not from the pulpit, not from any prepared page, not in the high formal cadence of a state address, but plainly in the voice of the man he had been before the crown, standing beside the coffin with his hand upon it, so that every soul in that cathedral had to hold utterly still to hear him. "You saw that fall," he said. "Nothing else at first. Just that. You saw that fall. And 2,000 people who had been trying with all the strength of their good manners to pretend that they had not seen it, who had been braced for the ceremony to paper over it and move on, felt something in their chests come loose at hearing the king simply name the thing. You saw it, and I will not stand before you and pretend you did not, or ask you to forget it, because I am not going to forget it, and neither should you. A strap failed. An old strap, worn out in the service of this cathedral, gave way under the weight of a good man, and for the length of one breath it seemed that Corporal Vale would come to harm even here, even now, even in the last hour that this kingdom had to keep faith with him. His hand moved on the flag, a slow smoothing, unconscious, the gesture of a man settling a blanket over a sleeping child. And in that breath I learned something about you, about all of you. Because do you know what this cathedral did when it thought a soldier's coffin would fall? It did not laugh. It did not turn away. 2,000 of you drew in your breath as if the blow had landed on your own body. You were afraid not for yourselves, not for the ceremony, not for the dignity of the crown. You were afraid for him, for a corporal from a border regiment that not 1 in 100 of you had ever heard of a month ago. That fear, that flinch, that great single indrawn breath of grief from 2,000 strangers, that was the truest honor this man has been paid all week, truer than the cathedral, truer than the king. You loved him in that instant, all of you, the way you would love your own. And I will tell you why. He lifted his hand from the coffin then, and looked out over the whole of that vast crowd, down the long nave to the west doors and the ordinary people crushed in the aisles, and his voice, still not loud, seemed to fill the stone up to its highest vault. Because he stood at the near end of the bridge. I did not understand in that moment all that he meant by it. The crowd did not either, but we would. There is a thing that soldiers know, the king went on, and that the rest of us spend our lives trying not to think about. It is this, that at the edges of every peaceful morning out where the maps go blank, there is always a bridge, and there is always someone standing at the near end of it, someone between the fire and the town. Someone who has decided in a gray hour before dawn that you and I will sleep straight through, that the raid does not cross while he can stand. We do not see them. That is the whole of the arrangement, that we do not have to see them, that we may go to our markets and our beds and our children's bedsides, and never once picture the man standing in the cold at the near end of the bridge, so that the fire does not reach us. Corporal Emrys Vale stood at the near end of the bridge. He set the charge. He held while it was lit. 8 men came home across the water, and a town full of people who will never know his name woke to an ordinary morning and burned nothing but their breakfast toast. And he did not come home. He came here. The king put his hand back on the coffin. So when his coffin faltered in front of you just now, when for one breath it seemed the kingdom might drop him, you were right to be afraid. You were right to reach for him with your whole heart, all 2,000 of you at once, because he reached for you first, on a bridge you never saw, in a dark you slept through. He reached for you first, and he did not let go, and the only fitting answer a kingdom can give to a man who would not let go of it. And here, for the first time, the king's voice caught just slightly, just for a word, and then went on steady, is that it will not let go of him. Not while I am here. Not while any of you are here. Not ever. I have stood in that cathedral for many ceremonies since, and I have never heard it as silent as it was then. It was not the silence of people who did not know what to feel. It was the silence of people feeling something almost too large to hold. And then King Alaric did the second thing that no king is supposed to do. He turned from the coffin and he walked down off the sanctuary steps and up the nave to the front pew on the left, to the family, and he went to them not as a monarch receiving them, but as a man coming to sit with the bereaved. He stopped first before Emrys Vale, the mother. She had risen, as everyone rose when the king approached, and she stood very straight and very small in her dark coat, her chin up, her eyes dry with the particular dryness of a grief that has gone past tears into something harder and more permanent. The king looked at her for a long moment. And then he inclined his head to her, the king, inclining his head to a corporal's mother, a slow, deep, deliberate bow such as I had never seen him give to any ambassador or prince. "Madam," he said, "you gave this kingdom the best thing it has. I know what that costs. I know there is nothing I can say to you that is worth what you paid, but I can tell you what I saw if you will let me, because you were behind him and could not. When his coffin faltered, this whole cathedral tried to catch him. 2,000 hands. He is not carried by strangers, madam. He never was. Every soul in this room is his family this morning, and they will be his family long after we have all gone home." Emrys Vale looked up at her king, and the hard, dry thing in her face did not break, but it changed. She said something to him, very low, that I did not hear and would not repeat if I had, and the king listened to it with his head bent to catch it, and then he took her hand in both of his and held it. Then he turned to Aloan, the widow who had not risen, who I think could not have risen, who sat white and still with her gloved hands in her lap, and her eyes fixed on the coffin at the far end of the nave as though if she looked away it would be gone. The king did not make her stand. He did a thing I did not expect. He lowered himself, a big man of 60, with the dust of the floor still on his knees. He lowered himself down to her level, crouched by the end of the pew so that his face was below hers, and she did not have to look up to a standing king in the worst hour of her life, and he waited until she brought her eyes down from the coffin to his face. "I am not going to tell you it will pass," he said to her, quietly only for her, though I stood close enough to hear. "People will tell you that, and they will mean it kindly, and they will be wrong. It does not pass. You carry it. But I will tell you the true thing, which is that you will not carry it alone, because this morning he became the kingdom's, and the kingdom does not set down what it has taken up. Do you understand me? You will never again in your life be a woman the realm does not know the name of. When you are old, Emrys Vale, and I am long dead, there will be soldiers not yet born who will know your husband's name and salute it and stand a little straighter for it. That I can promise you. That much of him I can keep alive." And Emrys Vale, who had not moved and had not wept where anyone could see her, put her face down into her hands at last and wept, and the king crouched there by the pew and let her, and did not hurry her, and did not look away. It was little Aveline who broke the spell, the way only a child of 5 can, because she did not know that there was a spell to keep. She had been watching all of it with the wide, solemn, uncomprehending attention of the very young, The fall, the king on his knees, her grandmother's held hand, her mother's weeping. And now, with the king crouched right there at the end of her pew, close enough to touch, she did the thing that had been building in her all through that long, strange morning. She slid down off the pew, her small shoes finding the floor at last, and she walked the 2 steps to the King of Eldermore, and she put her hand on his sleeve to make him look at her. And when he turned his face to hers, she said, in the clear, carrying voice of a child that has not yet learned to whisper in cathedrals, a voice that reached halfway up that silent nave, "Is my daddy all right? I have carried coffins, and I have stood at the side of dying men, and I have never heard a sound due to a room what those 4 words did. Somewhere behind me, a grown man made a noise like a sob and choked it back. Princess Adela, up on the dais, put her hand to her mouth. The King of Eldermore, crouched on the stone floor of his cathedral, looked into the face of a corporal's daughter who wanted to know if her father was all right, and I watched him take the full weight of that question, the whole impossible, unanswerable, tearing weight of it, and I watched him decide in the space of a breath, not to lie to her and not to break her. "He is all right," the king said to Aveline. "I promise you he is all right. Do you know what your daddy did?" Aveline shook her head. "Your daddy was so brave," said the king, "that a whole town of people are safe in their beds tonight because of him. A whole town. Mothers and fathers and little girls just like you, all safe, all warm, all right, because your daddy stood in front of them when it was dark and frightening, and he did not run away. He was the bravest man in the whole kingdom. And do you know what happens to the very bravest men? The whole kingdom takes care of them forever and ever, and it takes care of their families too. So you are going to be all right, Aveline. You and your mother and your grandmother. The king is going to make sure of it himself. Do you believe me?" Aveline considered this with the grave thoroughness of the young. Then she nodded. And then, because she was 5, and because the king had a kind face, and because it had been a very long and very strange morning, she leaned forward and put her arms around the king's neck and held on. King Alaric of Harrogate knelt on the floor of the Great Cathedral at Harrogate and let a corporal's daughter put her arms around his neck, and he closed his own arms very gently around her. And for a moment, the King of Eldermore and the child of the man in the coffin held on to each other in front of the whole kingdom, and no one in that vast room drew a single breath. Then he set her back from him softly and stood, and this time he did take the offered arm, which was Crown Prince Rowan's, come down quietly from the dais to his father's side. But he did not lean on it to rise. He took it, I understood, to keep his son beside him for what came next. The king turned. He walked back up the nave, past the bowing rows, past the men of my guard standing rigid and wet-eyed at their posts, past the clergy who had long since abandoned any thought of the appointed order of the rite, and he climbed the sanctuary steps and stood once more at the head of the coffin, with his hand upon the flag, and his graying son beside him, and he lifted his eyes to the whole of that cathedral, and to the greater kingdom that he knew was listening beyond its walls. And when he spoke now, the plain, grieving man of a few minutes before was gone, and in his place stood the king, but a king made larger, not smaller, by everything the crowd had just watched him do on his knees on the floor. "Hear me," said King Alaric, and his voice went out over them like a bell. "What was very nearly a disaster in this cathedral this morning, I intend to make into a foundation. So let it be recorded, and let it be proclaimed in every town and every barrack square and every border post of this realm, that on this day the King of Eldermore makes the following decrees, and that he makes them not from his throne but from the side of a corporal's coffin on his knees, where he belongs. First, the old strap failed because it was forgotten, hung in a store and left to rot because no ceremony had needed it in years, and no one had thought to test what was not in use. That will never happen again in this kingdom, not to any soldier's bier. From this day the equipment that carries our dead to their rest will be inspected and renewed as faithfully as the equipment that carries our living to their battles, and the man who oversees it will answer to the crown directly, and it will be counted an office of the highest honor, not the lowest. We forgot that strap. We will forget nothing that touches our dead again. Second, no man of my guard is to bear one word of blame for what happened here, today or ever. What this kingdom will remember of the royal guard this morning is not a strap that broke. It is 4 men who went to their knees under a falling weight rather than let it touch the ground, and 7 who carried a soldier home with their king in their line. I saw men do their duty today past the point where duty ends and love begins. They are not to be reprimanded. They are to be thanked. And the sergeant whose strap failed through no fault of his own, and who dropped to catch the weight with his own body before any other man had moved, let his name be set in the record of this day beside the corporals, for they held the same weight this morning, and neither of them let it fall. I felt every eye in the sanctuary come to me where I stood at my post, and I kept my own eyes forward, and level, the way I had been trained, because it was the only thing keeping me from breaking, and I let them look. Third, said the king, and now his hand tightened on the flag, and this is the heart of it. We honor kings in this kingdom. We honor them with cathedrals and crowns and long processions, and we are right to, for a crown carries a weight of its own. But we have been slow, I have been slow, to honor with the same weight the men who stand at the near end of the bridge. We give them a medal if they are lucky enough to have someone left alive to see it pinned on. We give them a line in a citation that a clerk reads once and files away. And then we let them rot like that strap, hung on a hook in a cold store, out of use, out of mind, until the morning we need them and find them gone. No longer. I decree the founding of the Order of the Near Bridge. He said the name slowly, letting it land, and I saw men mouth it back to themselves, and I knew even then that it would outlast every one of us. It shall be the highest honor this kingdom can bestow upon a soldier, and it shall be given for one thing only, for the man or woman who stood between the danger and the people when they could have stepped aside, and who did not step aside. Corporal Emrys Vale of the King's Own Marches Regiment is its first member. His name heads the roll. And every year on this day in this cathedral, the roll of the Order of the Near Bridge shall be read aloud from beginning to end. Every name, however humble, however far from the capital he fell, read out in full before the king and the whole court, standing, so that no man who stood at the near end of the bridge for this kingdom is ever again hung on a hook and forgotten. We will say their names until our throats are dry. We will say them forever. He paused. The cathedral was so still I could hear the candles. And to the family of the first man of the order, the king went on, more quietly now, the crown pledges this, not as charity but as a debt owed and gladly paid, that the widow and the mother and the daughter of Corporal Vale shall want for nothing that this kingdom can provide for the whole of their lives. His daughter's schooling, her home, her keeping, are the crown's own care from this hour. She asked me a moment ago whether her father was all right. His voice went rough again, and he did not hide it. I told her yes, I intend to spend the rest of my reign making it true. A kingdom that lets the child of such a man go cold or hungry or forgotten has no business calling itself a kingdom at all, and while I wear this crown it will not happen. Not to her, not to any of them. He lifted his hand from the coffin at last and stepped back, and inclined his head to the flag, the deep bow again, the bow he had given the mother, and he said, in the plain voice once more, the last of it. Now let the right go on, but let it go on knowing what it is for. We are not folding a soldier away this morning. We are taking him up. Proceed. And he stepped down to the foot of the sanctuary steps and stood there, not on his dais, not in his chair, but on his feet at the foot of the steps beside the coffin, where he remained, standing through the whole of the rest of the long rite, so that Corporal Emrys Vale was never for one moment of his funeral without his king on his feet beside him. I will not take you through the whole of the ceremony that followed, though I remember every minute of it. The readings were read. The great anthem rose up into the vaulting and filled it. The commendation was spoken. But it was all changed now, all of it, lifted and charged by what had come before, so that the ancient words that can sometimes feel like a machine grinding through its motions came out that morning as though they had been written that hour for that man. When the choir sang, grown soldiers in the pews wept openly and were not ashamed. When the final commendation was given, 2,000 people said the responses in a voice like the sea. And when it was done, and it came time for us to take Corporal Vale up one last time and carry him out through the west doors to the gun carriage that waited to bear him to his rest, there was the matter of the 8th place in the bearer line and my broken strap, and who would fill it. Captain Dane came to me quietly before we lifted, a fresh strap in his hands, a good strap, a sound one, drawn now under the king's new order from stores that would never again be trusted to time and damp. "Your corner, Sergeant," he said, and there was something in his face I had not seen from Osric Dane in 11 years of service, which was that his eyes were wet and he did not care. "Take your corner. The king asked particularly that you carry him out. He said the man who caught him should be the man who sees him home." So I took my own corner, with a sound strap over my own shoulder, and I carried Corporal Emrys Vale back up the long nave and out through the great west doors into the pale winter light, and the King of Eldermore walked behind the coffin the whole way with the family, with Nerys and Elowen, and with Aveline riding in the crook of the crown prince's arm, her small face grave over Rowan's shoulder, and behind them came Princess Adela, and behind her the whole of the court, and behind them, pouring out of the cathedral into the square, the 2,000 who had come to stand with a corporal they had never met. Outside, the news of what had happened inside had already run through the vast crowd that filled the cathedral square and every street that ran off it. Tens of thousands of people who had not been able to get in, standing in the cold since before dawn just to be near. And as we came out through the doors with the coffin on our shoulders and the king bareheaded behind it, that enormous crowd, who had heard by then that their king had gone to his knees on the stone to catch a soldier and had knelt again to a soldier's child, did what the crowd inside had done. They bowed. A whole city, block after block after block, bowing in the winter light as a corporal came out of the cathedral, and the only sound in all that vast bowed silence was the slow beat of a single muffled drum and the ring of our boots on the cobbles. I want to tell you about Cadwyn Brooke, because his story finished that day too, and its finish is part of the honor of the thing. The Lord Steward had gone, at the king's command, to kneel by the family and tell them nothing was wrong. He had knelt by Nerys Vale, the same old man who an hour before had been hunting through the cathedral for a guardsman to break, and something in that kneeling had reached into him and turned something over. I did not see all of it, but I saw him at the west doors as we carried the coffin out, and the man had changed. The gray correctness had gone out of his face, and something plainer and better had come into it. And when the procession reformed in the square, he did not take his high place near the head of it where the Lord Steward walks. He went to the back, and he walked the whole route to the burial ground on foot among the ordinary people, an old man in his robes of office walking in the cold with the crowd, and I understood that he was doing a kind of penance, and that it had not been ordered and would never be recorded, and that it was real. Weeks later, I heard that he had asked the king's leave to be the first keeper of the new office the king had decreed, the office that would see to it that no strap and no soldier's beer was ever again left to rot forgotten on a hook. The king granted it. Cadwyn Brooke kept that office until he died, and by all accounts he kept it as though the whole honor of the kingdom hung on a length of webbing, which, he had learned, it can. We buried Corporal Emrys Vale that afternoon in the Hallowmere, the old ground where the honored dead of the realm lie under the yews, in a plot that the king commanded be set at the very center where the paths cross, so that no one walking there could fail to pass him. The winter light was going gold by then. The great crowds had been left behind at the cathedral. Only the family and the household and a guard of honor stood at the graveside as the last words were said. I stood in the guard of honor. When it came time to lift the flag from the coffin and fold it, the flag that the king's own hand had swept back over the lid an inch above disaster. It was folded by 8 men of the guard into the tight blue and silver triangle, corner over corner, 13 slow folds, and it was not a steward or a general who took the folded colors and carried them to the widow. It was the king. He carried the folded flag to Alaric Vale himself, and he went down on one knee before her one more time, there in the cold gold light under the yews, and he put the colors of the realm into her hands and closed her fingers over them with both of his, and he said something to her that I did not hear, and she nodded, and that was the burial of Corporal Emrys Vale. That was many years ago now. I am an old man, or near enough. I left the guard a long while back, my shoulders worn past the carrying of anything heavier than my own coat, and I have watched from the crowd, these last years, as the thing the king began beside that coffin has grown into the fixed heartbeat of the kingdom's year. For it happens still. On this same day, every winter in the Great Cathedral at Harrogate, the roll of the Order of the Near Bridge is read aloud from beginning to end. It was a short roll that first year, one name. It is not short any more. It takes the better part of an hour now to read them all. The men and the women who stood between the danger and the people and did not step aside, name after name after name, from every corner of the realm, read out slowly and in full before the king and the whole standing court, exactly as Alaric decreed. Until our throats are dry, he said, and forever. Old King Alaric read that roll himself every year that he lived, standing, refusing all his life to sit for it. And when he grew too frail to stand unaided, he had 2 of the guard stand close on either side to steady him, but stand he did to the last winter of his reign. Crown Prince Rowan reads it now, King Rowan, and he reads it standing too, and I am told he will not let anyone shorten it or hurry it though the roll grows longer every year, because his father made him promise, and because he was there, and because he carried a corporal's daughter out of a cathedral in the crook of his arm and has never forgotten the weight of her. And Aveline. I saw her only last winter at the reading. She is a grown woman now, of course, more than grown. She has children of her own, a girl and a boy who sat beside her in the front pew on the left, in the same pew where she once swung her feet because they would not reach the floor. She serves the realm herself these days, though not with a rifle. She took the schooling the king gave her and gave it back to the kingdom tenfold, and she works now among the families of the fallen, among the widows and the mothers and the small children with the wide, uncomprehending eyes, sitting with them in the worst hour of their lives the way a king once crouched by a pew and sat with hers. She did not weep at the reading last winter. She has heard her father's name read first on that roll every year of her life. It does not undo her any more, it holds her up. But when they reached his name, Corporal Emrys Vale, of the king's own Marches regiment, who stood at the near end of the bridge, she stood, as the family always stands for their own name, and she put her hand flat on the shoulder of her small son beside her, and I saw her lips move, and I did not need to hear it to know what she said to him. That his great-grandfather was the bravest man in the whole kingdom, that a whole town of people were safe in their beds because of him, that the very bravest men are taken care of forever, and their families too. I have thought a great deal in my old age about that morning, about the strap, and the fall, and the breath of 2,000 people, and the king on his knees on the stone. And I have decided that I understand at last the thing King Alaric knew in the half-second it took him to come up out of his chair, the thing that made him move faster than a man his age had any business moving. He knew that a kingdom is not tested by the ceremonies that go right. Any kingdom can carry a coffin smoothly down a smooth aisle on a sound strap and call itself honorable. What tells you the truth of a people is what they do in the half-second after the strap breaks, whether they reach for someone to blame or reach for the falling weight, whether they step back to save their dignity or go down on their knees to save a stranger's. That morning the strap broke in front of the whole kingdom, and the whole kingdom found out, all at once in a single indrawn breath, what it was made of. It found out that it would catch the falling thing. that it would put its king on the floor before it would let a soldier touch the ground, that it would kneel to a corporal's child and mean every word. The accident was not the story. I know that now, though I did not know it kneeling on the cold stone with my arms full of a good man's weight. The accident was only the question. King Alaric was the answer, and the answer he gave, on his knees, with a flag in his fist and dust on his robes, was that in this kingdom the sacred does not fall while there is a hand left to catch it. I carried a stranger down an aisle once and a strap broke, and I have spent the rest of my life proud past all telling of what my kingdom did in the half-second after. He is not carried by strangers, the king said to the mother. He never was. Neither, I have found, are any of us. Not while there is a king who will kneel. Not while there is a roll that is read until the throat runs dry. Not while there is a girl grown to a woman who leans down to her own son in a cold cathedral and tells him, once a year forever, the name of the man who stood at the near end of the bridge. That is the whole of it. That is what I saw. Steady, my guard, he said to us, down on the stone with his hand under the corner. He is not going to fall, not while I am here. He never did.